Here we go on a Sunday morning in Las Vegas. It's just after 8 o'clock. I'm Spencer the Wiz, and this is Out of Line. We are live same time every Sunday on Fox Sports Radio, 98.9 FM and 1340 AM, flagship of the Vegas Golden Knights. I'm coming to you from the Wiz Den, also known as my room, here in Pahrump, just for this broadcast, filling in for host Brian Feldman. We are here because we have been booted from the Fox Sports Residential Bancorp studio until further notice due to COVID protocol. Social distancing back in the Fox Sports Residential Bancorp studio is producer Chris Chapman, aka Magnum, who, aside from producing a number of shows at Lotus Broadcasting, is a locker room reporter for the Vegas Golden Knights radio network. This show is also streaming on the LV Sports Network, and you can watch the show on Facebook Live, Twitter, and YouTube. The page is called Out of Line. That's OUTTALINE. Follow the show on Twitter at OutofLineFoxLV. And since we are live, your calls and questions are welcome. The Fox Sports Residential Bancorp studio line is 702-876-1340.
Hi, this is Bubby, and it's time for What's on Tap.
What's on Tap, brought to you by title sponsor Residential Bancorp. Whether purchasing a new home or refinancing the home you currently own, Residential Bancorp is the company to turn to for all your home financing needs. Residential Bancorp, funding America one neighborhood at a time. Call 702-964-4720 for more details. On tap, the Vegas Golden Knights have traded away one of their best players, and some major NBA trades are in the works. And if we have time, we'll go over some of the biggest prop bets related to the Raiders at the end of the broadcast. That's what's on tap. If you are looking to buy a home or to refinance the home you currently own, choose a company you can trust, Residential Bancorp, funding America one neighborhood at a time. Like I said, call 702-964-5720 for details. Before we get into the show, I would like to introduce producer Chris Magnum Chapman. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing pretty well, Spencer. Got the notice this morning it was just you, no Brian. So the lunatics are running the asylum today, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think we'll have a good time, and we'll start with Vegas's favorite team, or used to be a favorite team, I guess, and that is the Golden Knights.
Hockey players, as you know, are warriors. They don't give up. They come to play every game.
It's time for Nightcap, a cupful of the Vegas Golden Knights. From highlights to interviews to special events, the puck starts here.
I did want to say, before we go on, if anyone watches the show streaming, in the graphic, I have a puck full of the Golden Knights, but as of recent, I've realized I think it says a cup full. I don't know. Do you hear anything else, Magnum, when it comes to the intro for Nightcap?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's cup full of the Vegas Golden Knights, but
I like cup full.
Well, cup full would make sense because of the Stanley Cup. So you got the top of the trophy there, which is the bowl. The Stanley Cup. So I'm pretty sure. Well, I think we both know Brian probably wrote it. So then again, maybe he didn't. I don't know if he's that creative. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a cup full. But
that's funny.
I'm also going deaf. So too many years of listening to loud music. So
yeah, with headphones right on top of your ears. But
always.
we will go into the Golden Knights here, and the biggest news other than Riley Smith, which is Riley Smith being signed, good thing. But the thing that wasn't good was a trade that sent Pacioretty to the Hurricane, and essentially like a shameless salary dump. I mean, I think that's the only way you can describe it. They got future considerations, so I think when you hear that, it literally means they gave him away for free because the Golden Knights salary cap situation was such a nightmare.
Yeah, well, they also had to include Dylan Coghlan in that deal as well, a guy who played about 60 games for the Golden Knights last season. And the funny thing about Dylan Coghlan is he's one of the very, very few players in NHL history to score his first NHL goal and add his second and third NHL goals for a hat trick in the same game. And I think he's only one of two defensemen in NHL history to do that. So little Dylan Coghlan trivia. The salary dump is a good way to describe it. I was pretty adamant about the fact that this is because of years of salary cap mismanagement. Spencer, the thing is, you cannot continue to add salary at the rate that the Golden Knights did and then not expect at some point to have to move it. I described it a lot like when I was 18 years old and I was in the mall and there was someone from Visa. Actually, I think I was on my college campus and there was someone from Visa signing people up for credit cards. And I was like, oh, cool. Let me get a credit card. And I was 18 and I got my credit card and it was $1,000 limit. And in about 6 months, I had maxed it out. And that free money all of a sudden was not free money anymore. I had to pay it back. Plus, I had to pay interest back. So that's pretty much what happened here. The Golden Knights maxed out their credit card. They had to pay interest, and now they have to start paying it back to get back under the max limit there. So I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. Look, Pacioretty was hurt a lot last year. I know you're not the biggest Max Pacioretty fan. But the thing is, no matter what you think of Pacioretty or his play, you're taking away a guy who had 19 goals in only 39 games last year for the Golden Knights. So, common sense would say he's probably at least a 30-goal scorer if he plays a full season, probably more than that. Maybe a 35-goal scorer if he plays 78 games or if he plays 80 games. That type of production is hard to make up. The good news for the Golden Knights is they should have a full season of Jack Eichel, and hopefully, fingers crossed, you have a full season of Mark Stone. And those two having full seasons with now Bruce Cassidy, you have to think that they can make up their production. But there's other moves here that you look at, and they traded away Evgeny Dadonov, who had 20 goals for this team, and they basically traded him for salary cap relief, picking up the contract of Shea Weber. Last season, they traded away Marc-Andre Fleury to the Chicago Blackhawks for nothing. So if you're going to spend that much money, I think it's imperative that you have those players on your roster. Like the Pacioretty deal to me is really the epitome of mismanagement, because we could go back to the very first season of the Golden Knights before Max Pacioretty was on the team. They traded away a first, a second, and a third-round pick for Tomas Tatar, who was on the team for 4 months. They traded Tomas Tatar, Nick Suzuki, now an all-star, and a second-round pick, which turned into Samuel Fagamo, who plays now for the Ontario Reign and had like 30 goals in the LA Kings AHL organization last year, for Max Pacioretty. You come 4 or 5 seasons down the road, the Golden Knights have now traded Max Pacioretty and Dylan Coghlan to the Carolina Hurricanes for absolutely nothing. So there's two ways people look at it. It's, what did you get out of Pacioretty while he was here? He had 97 goals in basically 3.5 seasons with the Golden Knights. Look, that's a lot of goals. I think he also brought legitimacy to the franchise because he was the captain of the Montreal Canadiens. He was a star player in the biggest hockey market, maybe outside of Toronto, in the league, and he was more than willing to waive his no-trade clause to come to Vegas. So he gave the franchise legitimacy in year 2, and he scored 97 goals. But at what cost? That's the question that we will, I guess, address in the upcoming season, because if this team misses the playoffs again, there's going to be probably a lot of questions to be answered by a lot of people within the organization if this team fails to make the playoffs again, and they do so because they don't have a guy like Max Pacioretty on the team.
Yeah, I do want to look back at Pacioretty a little bit further and really get down to the nitty gritty, because he was supposed to be like the star player, and in a sense he was. So 48 games in 2020-21 season, and then he had so in 48 games he had 39 goals. So and then last season, a little less productive, a little less games, but in the playoffs, 5 goals, 3 assists in 16 games, 5 goals, 6 assists in 13 games played in last year's playoffs. Did you ever feel, and maybe I'm wrong, and like you said, I was never the biggest fan of his. A lot of it had to do with health, but did you ever feel like he was there when they needed him the most? Because he was the guy who was supposed to be the star player to lead them to the Stanley Cup. Make no doubt about it. He was supposed to be their star scorer, and I feel like he fell short a lot of the time.
Well, I'll go back to the San Jose game, Game 7, the not a major game. Max Pacioretty did have a goal in that game, so that should have been the goal that finished off the San Jose Sharks. But I he did score some big goals. I'm trying to think. Obviously, the last time this team was in the playoffs and we got to watch them play was a while ago. But I think he had a couple of big goals. I'd say that the team in general underachieved in the time that he was there. And I'm not discounting making 2 Western Conference finals. I mean, that's really impressive to do it back-to-back years. But at the end of the day, in those conference finals, like he didn't score in the Montreal series. I mean, he was not good in that series, and that was a quote-unquote Western Conference final or whatever you want to call it. It was a conference final. It was an opportunity to advance to the Stanley Cup final. Nobody really showed up in that series, though. The Dallas series, I can't recall him having any big goals in that series, but nobody showed up in that series. The only player who I can really remember showing up in the Montreal series was Nick Waugh. But I think in general, it was a team issue because the San Jose series in season 2, they should have won that game, and they should have advanced to play the Colorado Avalanche in the second round. And Colorado was still in the upswing, so who knows what happens if the Golden Knights beat the Sharks in that series in season 2. Season 3 was the bubble. It's hard to really remember anything about the bubble other than the fact that they failed against a Dallas Stars team that they were leaps and bounds better than. And then last year, they fail again in the conference final to the Montreal Canadiens, and then year 5, they don't make the playoffs. So my memory is a little foggy in terms of how many big goals he scored in the playoffs, just because I feel like the last 2 seasons have been a bit of a blur. I can tell you I don't recall him having any big goals against Montreal or Dallas. So if that's going to be the barometer, then yeah, I would say that he certainly did not show up in those games or in those series.
Yeah, and I mean, the biggest difference between the Golden Knights winning a Stanley Cup and not is their biggest stars not showing up in the biggest series. So it's weird that they have gotten so far, and it's special, and it's like lucky for fans, obviously, that the Golden Knights have been so good from literally the first game that they played. But before we go on to the other things, so there's a lot I want to talk about the Golden Knights, and it is Mark Stone, because I feel like it's a weird sore spot where he just gets a pass every year. But every single time in literally every one of the biggest series, Mark Stone has had like 0 points almost every time. And yet no one ever seems to talk about how low his production has been, especially when you talk about some of the injuries he's had. I mean, this has to be the last year of Mark Stone getting a pass or staying on the team if he's like not as productive as like he was when they picked him up.
Well, yeah, for me, the big thing with Mark Stone will boil down to his health. He's coming off the back injury. So that's obviously a very serious concern because I just remember star players dealing with back issues. And I was always told, that a back is the most important thing in your body because without that working well or functioning the right way, it really causes a lot of issues throughout the rest of the body. I don't know exactly what the issue was with Mark Stone. We just know it was a back. Kelly McCrimmon spoke to the media the other day. I believe it was Thursday. And he said that, he's been told that the recovery for Mark Stone is going well. There was no time frame on whether or not he would be available for the start of the season. We don't know. I'm going to hope he is. But you're right. I think for a lot of times, for a long time, he has kind of gotten a pass. And I think the team goes as he goes because I think what he brings emotionally and intangible wise, it's something that can't be undersold. Defensively, what he provides, he's always near the top of the league in takeaways, and the thing that makes him always in the conversation for the Selke is not only how good he is taking away the puck from the other team, but he's so good offensively as well, providing assists, scoring goals. He's the emotional leader of the team, but I feel like you're right. He does kind of get a pass in that he also hasn't produced the big time. Like he doesn't have that massive moment that you would have hoped you would have from him at this point where he scores a winning goal in a conference final in a game 6 to send them to the cup final or puts them on the brink. I think this is probably a year which is going to be crucial for him for a lot of reasons. I think from what I know of Mark Stone, is he is a very emotional guy on the ice. Like he truly, like, you watch the way he celebrates when he scores. He celebrates even harder when other people score. Like, he is the consummate team guy. Like, I don't think there's anybody in that locker room who embodies being the team guy more than Mark Stone. And for as good of a player he is, to be that guy is really cool. But at some point, you want him to have that moment where he takes over a series, where he has the I mean, it's unfair to say Cale Makar, but he has almost that Nathan McKinnon type series where he shows up and he just completely dominates a series. He hasn't had that. He's obviously scored goals, and he scored some big goals, but he hasn't had a time where he just took over a series and made it known that he was the best player on the ice. I don't know if we're going to get that. I feel like that's more of a Jack Eichel thing, because I think Stone is a different type of player. Like, I don't feel like he's a dominating player, whereas Jack Eichel could be. But nonetheless, until Jack Eichel was here, Mark Stone was the man. Like, he was the guy. And I think you're right. He hasn't had that pinnacle moment in his playoff career. I mean, certainly he scored some really big goals in the regular season, but as far as, like I said, taking over a playoff series and really dominating it, he hasn't had that.
No, and the thing is like when they traded for him, and I could be exaggerating, maybe I am. I just remember the sentiment being that he was a top 10 player in the NHL. And as the last couple of years have gone by, I don't even know if I put him in the top 20, which may be like too extreme, maybe an exaggeration, but that's just kind of how I feel at the moment. We'll get back to some other things with the Golden Knights. I mean, we kind of talked about it, but I mean, this Pacioretty trade is really just them choosing Eichel over Pacioretty in the first place, because he's essentially filling that role, and the salary is going to go to Eichel instead of, Pacioretty. I mean, that's kind of what it is. The team just chose one player or the other. And of course they traded for Eichel, so they didn't really have much of a choice in the first place.
Yeah, well, and like I said, it at the very beginning, it kind of comes down to not really, basically, to maxing out, no pun intended, your credit card. They went over their spending limit, and now they had to cut things from their budget in order to make ends meet. I think there's some real questionable moves that you look at over the course of the 5 seasons, and now we enter season 6. There's some real questionable moves that you look at. Like, I think certainly this is going to be one of them. I think when you sign Marc-Andre Fleury to that extension after year 1, that was kind of there really wasn't a reason to do that, because he still had another year left on his deal. You could have played him out and seen how it went. He made it clear he wanted to stay in Vegas. At that point, I think you could have maybe extended him halfway through season 2. It was the amount of money that they gave him, $7 million over 3 years, or 3 years. I'm sorry, $7 million AAV over 3 years. That was kind of the first, and you traded away some prospects, obviously. Cody Glass was the first pick in franchise history in the entry draft. That clearly did not work out. Cody Glass, probably not a full-time NHL player. Maybe at some point he'll prove me wrong, but they missed on that when there were certainly, unfortunately for them, there really weren't any great players that were drafted after Cody Glass. Like that draft will go down as the Cale Makar draft, and the 3 teams that passed on Cale Makar, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Dallas. That's their draft. And then, of course, Elias Pettersson went right ahead of Cody Glass. But outside of Robert Thomas and Martin Necas, there really aren't any players. So at least with that, you kind of were like, okay, but maybe they should have looked at me. The thing is, we'll never know what the negotiations with the Montreal Canadiens were, whether or not they were insistent on Nick Suzuki, or if the Golden Knights refused to trade Cody Glass. Like, we will never know what that was. But I said at the get-go when they made that trade, and it's not hindsight. It sounds like it, but it's not. But I've been doing this for 6 years, covering the Golden Knights, and I said at the time, and I will stand by it, and obviously I've now been affirmed, they should have traded Cody Glass instead of Nick Suzuki. Like, that should have been the guy that they traded. Nick Suzuki, who knows what he turns out to be here if he stays here. But I think the idea of having him on the roster probably is a lot more palatable today than it would have been a couple of years ago. But yeah, the Cody Glass thing, that's certainly questionable. That trade where he was not the one sent to Montreal, it's just they got themselves into trouble by overspending. And at some point, you've got to pay the piper. There's the collection agency, and the Golden Knights are now in the phase where their paychecks being garnished by the collection agency because they haven't paid their bills. So we're going to see. This is a season in which there will be a lot of, I would say, I'm trying to think of the right word, but if expectations are not met, I think there will be a lot of changes at the end of this season if things do not go well this year. Because I don't get the sense Bill Foley is being very patient right now.
No, I don't think patient has been a word you would associate with the Golden Knights since year one. But I want to do one little retrospective, a small version of it where, yes, it's easy to say that what they've done has not worked because they have no Stanley Cups out of it. But they've been so aggressive. They got into a Stanley Cup and 2 conference finals. So can you really say that this is a failure? Can you really blame the team for going all out for 3 consecutive? I would say going all out for 3 consecutive years now. Yes, it didn't produce a Stanley Cup, but you never know. It's so hard to win a Stanley Cup. It's almost impossible, logistically. You know what I mean? So I hate judging teams
you need a lot of
Stanley
luck.
Cups or not. I hate judging teams just whether or not they win the championship, because I think you can think of a lot of failed big threes, but I don't know. I think not a lot of teams have the opportunities to have these kinds of teams that could actually compete for one. So I wouldn't say it's been a failure, even though it seems to be falling apart at the seams right now.
Yeah, I don't think failure is the right word to use either. I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. Look, if I'm a fan, you've been spoiled for 5 seasons, and you make the final in year 1, which is maybe, even though they didn't win it, is still arguably one of the most incredible moments in sports history. A franchise team, a bunch of cast-offs, goes on to the Cup final in arguably the sport that has the hardest trophy to win. That's pretty incredible. Year 2, they go out and they get Mark Stone, they get Max Pacioretty, they get Paul Stastny, 3 guys who are established, legit NHL players. They're robbed in a playoff series in a game in which they should have won, although I will say they should have won it in Game 6 and it never should have gotten to Game 7, but that's neither here nor there. Season 3 is the bubble. They make the conference final. Season 4 is half the season with no fans. They make the conference final there as well. Look, in 5 seasons, you have been to 3 conference finals. That's incredible. That's really something that the fans should look at, because I don't think the Seattle Kraken are a playoff team next year. You look at them, you're like, yeah, they're not a playoff team next year. And the way things are going, you don't even know if they're going to be a playoff team in year 3. That's generally how it works for expansion franchises. Generally, you suck for a long time before you get good. I remember the Nashville Predators and the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Minnesota Wild, and how long it took them to make the playoffs and let alone win a series in the playoffs. It takes time. The Golden Knights struck lightning in a bottle, and rather than sit on their laurels, they went out and they tried to get better. They did get better. I think last year's team, fully healthy, is better than the team that went to the Cup final. I don't know top to bottom if you could say that team is worse. I think they're better. So the thing is, the problem is the other teams around the Golden Knights have gotten better. And the Golden Knights, while they've gone out and they've gotten better players, it hasn't really translated to that year 1 success. There was a lot of discussion at the end of the season about identity and how they wanted to get back their identity. And I don't know if that was a way of saying Pete DeBoer took away their identity, or the fact that they just can't recreate what they did in year 1. I don't know. I guess there's a couple ways to look at it. But like I said, the fans here have been spoiled. And I understand now that this is a sports market. The one thing that kills me and it burns me up, and I'm one of those people who will constantly tell people this when I see it, the idea that you don't root for a team anymore because they trade your player or they release a player or they've don't re-sign a player, that's ridiculous. This is sports. This is how it works. I grew up rooting for the New Jersey Nets, who are now the Brooklyn Nets. My heart was broken when they left New Jersey. And you know what? I stopped rooting for them because of it. It kind of took me out of being a big NBA fan. But at the end of the day, that's not the same thing as a player being traded. The Golden Knights are still here. At some point, your favorite player is either going to be traded, he's going to not re-sign, he's going to retire. It's just the way it works. Sports is the whole idea of loyalty in sports, to me, is one of those things that is overblown because there's no loyalty either on the player's end or on the management's end. A perfect example of that was Johnny Gaudreau. He 8 years in Calgary. He was a 115-point guy. He wanted to go play in Philadelphia. That didn't happen. So rather than go back to Calgary, he went to Columbus, Ohio. But in the same regard, at any point in his career, the Calgary Flames could have traded him. So the loyalty is non-existent. It's about winning, and that's all it's about. It's about winning. And if you don't win, then that's the only thing that matters in sports. Like, sure, there's other side stories, but at the end of the day, the goal is to raise the Stanley Cup. And if the Golden Knights feel that they're going to be better by trading away Max Pacioretty, I don't know if that's how they really feel. I think it's probably, like you said at the very beginning, we've got a shed salary. I don't know if they're done. I would anticipate that there's maybe another move coming. What it is, I don't know. I have an idea, but I'm not going to say it. But there certainly are other moves that could be made, and we'll see what they do. I think they have to find a way to add another forward. I think that's paramount. They have to find a way to get Nick Waugh and Keegan Colasar re-signed. I think that's paramount as well. And obviously on the blue line, they got to get Nick Hague re-signed. So there's some question marks. Here we go into week 2 of free agency. The Golden Knights are in a position where they'll be able to fit guys under the cap, but they're still another forward short. And what they do, I don't know. I really like Evan Rodriguez, played for the Pittsburgh Penguins, had a career year, but I think you look at his career numbers, last season was an aberration, but he was Jack Eichel's line mate at Boston University. Him and Jack Eichel played together with the Buffalo Sabres. There's a comfort level there with those two guys. That's a guy who I would look at to come in and maybe be my third line wing. I don't know what they're going to do, Spence, but we'll see.
Yeah. So the one thing I wanted to say, going back to your comment about, the lightning in a bottle, I think you just have to be extremely careful with that. You can ask the UNLV run-in Rebels. They've been trying to chase that high since 1980. I was negative 17 years old, and here we are today, and they just haven't really done anything since. So I think that you're never going to recapture, what they did. And I think that if they try to, then they're going to doom themselves. Okay. One last thing on the Golden Knights, because I did want to mention this, because it could go horribly awry here. Things could start to get bad really quick. And especially when you consider all the picks they've given away, they've developed pretty much nobody since they've started the franchise, which is a really bad sign. But if it does go sour, do you still expect the T-Mobile to be packed every single night, or were the fans coming just for the wins?
Well, I think there's a combination. I think a lot of people will still be there, but we started to see some games last season where there wasn't a full house, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Who knows? Maybe COVID was still a thing. It still is a thing, unfortunately. But I think there will be a lot of people who don't show up, because I think whether they were protesting mask mandates or whether they were angry about whatever, trading Marc-Andre Fleury, maybe who knows. But I do think that this is now the point where you become a traditional city where you're not selling out every single game. Sure, in tickets sold, you're probably full. But in terms of people actually showing up, I think we saw some signs of that last season. And it was my big worry that this is a bit of a fair weather town. And I think when the team's not doing well, and fortunately, even though they subtracted a bit, they should still be in the playoff mix. But I think it's unfortunate, and I hope that this doesn't turn into the case where you're getting 13, 14,000 every single night because the team's not playing well. Look, this is your team. This is your city. Support them, whether they're good or bad. I will always believe that. I mean, I've been a massive sports fan as long as I can remember, and I'm a diehard New York Jet fan. We had season tickets, and you know what? There were seasons where the Jets were winning 4 or 5 games a year, but we were certainly there for all 8 games a season that we had. So show up, support the team, whether they're good or bad. But I do think that this could be a season in which, if the team is not good, that the attendance starts to decline.
Yeah, we'll see. I think that's one of the bigger storylines going into next season, personally. But we'll switch over because NHL free agency did start, and you did mention Johnny Gaudreau. Really, he shocked NHL free agency. So he signed, I say, measly 7-year, $68.25 million deal. The reason that's obviously a ton of money, but he turned down an 8-year, $84 million contract with the Flames. Everyone thought he was going to go east, somewhere like the Islanders, but he signed with the last place, Columbus Blue Jackets. Did you see this coming? I mean, this was obviously one of the bigger shocks of the NHL offseason.
I don't think anybody really saw him going to the Blue Jackets coming. I'm not even sure their general manager, Jarmo Kekalainen, saw that. But it was a really interesting story that developed on Wednesday, because all the rumors we heard Monday and Tuesday were that he was going to either the Islanders or he was going to the Devils. He's from New Jersey, although he's from South Jersey, very, very close to Philadelphia. Played in the Flyers, youth teams, and he grew up a Flyers fan, and he wanted to play for the Flyers. The Flyers, however, mismanaged their salary cap really bad, and they refused to trade away some salary that may have allowed them to go out and sign Johnny Gaudreau. They also made a couple of questionable signings, and it really hampered their flexibility in terms of being able to sign Gaudreau. So I think it trickled down on Tuesday night that he was going to leave Calgary, or he was going to test free agency. There's a couple ways to look at it, and I'm not a Calgary Flames fan, so I don't have the vitriol and the anger and the saltiness. But I'll look at it. I like to look at it from this perspective. When a superstar player like Johnny Gaudreau, and certainly he is a superstar, the guy probably should have won the Hart Trophy last year. That's how good of a season he had. When he leaves as a free agent and he goes to a small market team, like in the pecking order, Columbus is probably like in the bottom 20s, maybe 28, somewhere 28 to 32 in terms of destinations for free agents, for star players. Like, they've had multiple star players over the last couple of years leave. And I think when a player of his quality and his star power goes to Columbus, I think it's great, because it's good for small market teams. It shows that, hey, you know what, this is an opportunity. For so many years and for too long, we've seen superstar players, not just in the NHL, especially in the NBA, where they want to go to the big market and they want the big lights, whether it's New York or whether it's Toronto or it's Tampa or it's LA. For Johnny Gaudreau to pick up and leave Calgary and go to Columbus, I think it says a lot about the power that some small markets have. Like, Columbus is a nice city. By all accounts, it's a nice place to live. The one thing about Columbus is, no matter what happens, it's Ohio State's market. It's an Ohio State town. Ohio State football will always rule the roost in Columbus. Unless the Blue Jackets win the Stanley Cup, they're not knocking Ohio State off the front page very often. I think on Wednesday, when they signed Johnny Gaudreau, those headlines in Columbus, the Columbus Dispatch or whatever other newspapers they have there, my guess is Johnny Gaudreau was on the front page of their newspaper on Thursday morning, the day after he signed with the Blue Jackets. I think it's great for small markets. I'm a small market guy. I root for the small market teams. I want to see them successful, because I get sick of the Lakers and I get sick of the Maple Leafs and the Yankees and the Red Sox. I don't care. To me, those teams being shoved down my throat, I can't stand it. I want to see other teams. I want to see small teams have success. Nashville, Columbus, Ottawa. I want to see them do well. And for Gaudreau to go to Columbus, now they have him, and it sounds like Patrick Laine, their other star player, is going to re-sign and stay for a while. That's great. It's really great because you want the small markets to do well, because I really feel like the health of the league is measured not by the top teams, but by those mid-table, bottom-table teams, because those are the markets where you really need to find success. Toronto could be the worst team in the league. They're still going to sell out every game.
No, that's true. Well, do you think Johnny's enough to like make them relevant? Like, is he that good that he'll just like lift them into the playoffs? Because they still have a lot of issues on their team.
No, they're probably in the mix, but I don't think they're a cup contender. They have to go out and do a couple more things. I think. There are questions about some of their bottom six. We'll see. But I think that they have good goaltending, and obviously they're going to have some dynamic scorers, so that certainly helps. The problem is the division they play in is really, really tough, and I don't know if they have enough after Gaudreau and Laine. So we'll see. We'll see. I think they're in the mix for playoff team. I don't know if they are a legit. Like I don't look at them today and say they're a playoff team. I think they're close. But I don't look at them and say, yeah, they're going to be, win the top four in the East. No, I don't think that. But there's a plan in place, and now they're going to have him for the next 7 years. So a lot can change in the course of a season or two. So we'll see what the Blue Jackets do.
Yeah, I'm sure it's changing the trajectory of what they thought their offseason would look like. I don't think they thought he would show up to their front door asking for a contract. We'll switch over to the NBA. There's been some big news, some big rumors more than anything else. But we'll start with DeAndre Ayton, which has been, I don't know, one of the more head-scratching things, I think, of the NBA offseason. So the Indiana Pacers offered a 4-year, $132.9 million contract, which the Suns did match. So, he is a restricted free agent, meaning that the Suns can match anything, and then they get the contract. But really the whole news has been that they're just going to flip him for Kevin Durant, who's also been a disgruntled star despite signing his extension last offseason to stay with Brooklyn for an extra 4 years. I mean, really, this has just been a mess, in my opinion. I mean, the whole thing is that even if DeAndre Ayton's, he's going to sign this contract, this 132, because they didn't want to pay him. They didn't think he was worth max money, which is beyond me. He's like a top 5 center in the NBA, and that's just crazy that they are prioritizing someone like Chris Paul over DeAndre Ayton. But I don't know. It feels like it's going all wrong for the Phoenix Suns. Like, is that okay? So they go to the finals and then they have the best record in the NBA the next year. Yes, they ended up, flaming out against the Mavericks, which certainly was disappointing. But I don't know. This is the best the Phoenix Suns have been in my lifetime. And it feels like they're trying to do everything they can to blow it up. I mean, what went awry for the Suns team and Devin Booker? Like, maybe they're not. Maybe this is the right move. Maybe getting Ayton and then trading him off for Kevin Durant is the right move. But it just doesn't feel right considering how organically they built their team.
Yeah, it does feel a little odd. I think the sad thing is I know that they went to the final just 2 years ago. I think that was a bit of a fluke. They had a lot of things go their way, and then they got absolutely. They unfortunately lost to the Bucks. Last year, as you mentioned, they had the best record in the NBA. Did not translate to playoff success. There's always kind of been, and I like Chris Paul. I mean, obviously he's a first ballot Hall of Fame player, but there's just something that seems to follow him around, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is. Like, he's a great player, but it seems like success for him and his teams are short-lived. He's also nearing the end of his career. DeAndre Ayton is still a relatively young player. I would feel better building my team around DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker than Chris Paul and Devin Booker, because in a year or two, you may not have Chris Paul anyway. So it's now, if you trade Ayton for Kevin Durant, and obviously you make that package, first of all, if I'm Brooklyn, I don't know if I want that, because I think as much as Durant has been disgruntled, I still think Kevin Durant is a guy who shows up and plays, whether or not he's happy or not. Like, I don't think he's like the other guy on his team who seems to not really have an interest in playing basketball. And I think that guy is probably why Kevin Durant wants out. Like, if I'm the Nets, I'm actively looking to move Kyrie Irving before I look to move Kevin Durant, because I think if you move Irving, I think certainly Kevin Durant may change his opinion on whether or not he wants out. Because I don't think it's a coincidence that the day after Kyrie said that he's opting in, that KD declared that he wanted out. I don't find that to be coincidental. I think that's a cause and effect. It's going to be interesting because I think if you put Kevin Durant on the Suns, with or without DeAndre Ayton, that's a team that I look at and I'm like, all right, that's a legit NBA championship contender. Without Kevin Durant, I don't think they're that. If they keep DeAndre Ayton, look, DeAndre Ayton is a good player, but like I said, I don't know if I would pick Chris Paul over DeAndre Ayton. As you mentioned, he's a top 5 center. He's a guy who's going to give you, a lot every single night. Chris Paul, certainly that guy as well. But I look at the age, and to me, that's the biggest issue here. It's the fact that there's such a massive difference in the age. Like, I think if I'm Phoenix, I don't know if I can go out and get another Chris Paul, but I feel like I can go out and get an adequate point guard who will not have the massive drop off, because if you lose DeAndre Ayton, all of a sudden you don't have that center. Now maybe Kevin Durant makes up for that. Obviously, he's a much better player than DeAndre Ayton, but it's a really interesting time. Like, the NBA offseason never fails to be interesting. Obviously, there's the rumors about the guy up in Utah, Donovan Mitchell. Maybe he's on his way out. I've seen some rumors that maybe he's on his way to the Knicks, which would be ridiculous. But, it's certainly interesting. To me, my favorite offseason news has nothing to do with any of those guys. It's Damian Lillard re-upping for the Blazers and basically saying, look, it is a loyalty thing with me, even though I just trashed loyalty in the last segment. But I think Dame Lillard re-upping with the Blazers, and yes, he got a lot of money to do so. It's still pretty cool that a guy of his caliber is that committed to the Portland Trailblazers. And unfortunately they stink, but it is kind of cool to see that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things you have to break down. So I think what really went wrong for the Phoenix Suns was signing Chris Paul to a 4-year, $120 million contract. And I think that thing that you can't quantify for Chris Paul is that basketball is not his number one concern. His brand and his money are like more important than basketball to him. And I'm not blaming him for that. That's fine. Like, good for you. Like, securing money for your family for future generations. How can I ever say there's anything wrong with that? But I think when you look at the all-time greats, like when you think of LeBron after he lost in the finals against the Dallas Mavericks, literally nothing consumed his mind but winning a championship that next year. And that's exactly what he did. Now, I think that basketball isn't the most important thing in LeBron's life anymore. And I think you're seeing the repercussions of that. And that's how hard and that's how dedicated you have to be to win a championship. And Damian Lillard is kind of the same way to me. I think he's earning like $60 million a year now, which, again, good for him. But like, how are you ever going to build a team when someone's taking up like half of your cap space? It's pretty much not possible. And I think you've seen that throughout his career. So yes, it's good to see him like that, but you're giving the team no flexibility. The Supermax has widely been like a disaster, I think, for the NBA to keep players in, but it also just like cripples the teams that keep these guys around. And you did talk about Donovan Mitchell, and I do want to mention it just a little bit more because there was a trade package. So this is something that the New York Knicks declined. It was 6 first-round picks: Quentin Grimes, Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, and Miles McBride. But here's the way I think about it. I don't know. I think the Knicks need to seriously consider, because who have they drafted in the past, like, I don't know, my life of notes? They haven't. I think they've only re-signed in the last 20 years, re-signed one of their first-round picks to a second contract one time. So I feel like draft picks are like not valuable to them. And if you can get Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett, and Donovan Mitchell on the same team, I feel like everything else can kind of just fill in the gaps. So I don't know. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the New York Knicks? And if they did have that big three, I feel like they're generally going in the right direction. Like, and that's the most exciting team that I can think of since Carmelo Anthony and Amari Stoudemire, teamed up.
Yeah, the Knicks unfortunately have stunk forever. I mean, they had a playoff appearance last year, like one of those rare playoff appearances. I grew up in a New York Knicks household. My father was a diehard New York Knicks fan. I mean, going back to the 60s and 70s, he was going to the Garden to watch games. So, I mean, when I met Clyde Frazier and I got to tell my dad I had dinner with Clyde Frazier, he was ecstatic. He's like, you should have called me. I could have talked to him. I'm like, Dad, it doesn't work like that. I was working. But, it's one of those things where I think a lot of times the ownership of the Knicks gets in the way. James Dolan is a buffoon, and he's one of the worst owners in sports. So it's no shock that his dysfunction and his just absolute buffoonery gets in the way of the Knicks being a successful franchise. Look, they've had issues going back to Isaiah Thomas being their coach and the general manager. And we're now talking almost 20 years ago that this team hasn't been able to get out of their own way. This is the mecca of basketball. For those who have not been to New York or have never seen a game at MSG or have grown up around New York City basketball, New York City basketball is ridiculous. I think it's Showtime maybe that's doing a documentary about point guards that have come from New York City, and just it's like if you're a point guard in New York City and you're a good point guard and you make the NBA, you get your marble statue at Rucker Park, So for the Knicks to be as bad as they've been for as long as it's been, and some of my best friends are New York Knicks fans, and I see the struggle and the agony that goes along with it. Spence, I just want to see this franchise get good. I want to see them have some success because I feel like my friends are due for a successful team, for a good team. Like I can remember the days when Patrick Ewing and John Starks and Charles Oakley, those were the guys at the Garden, and the Knicks were winning 60 games a year. And unfortunately, it was the same era that Michael Jordan was dominating the NBA. But that team probably wins an NBA title if not for Michael Jordan. I mean, the Knicks haven't won an NBA title in like 50 years. I think 73 was the last time the Knicks won a title. I mean, that's unbelievable for New York City that their one and only basketball team, sorry, Brooklyn, that their one and only basketball team is going on almost 50 years without an NBA title. It's unreal to think that that's how long it's been since the Knicks have been the dominant team in the NBA. But if they could pull off a deal to get Donovan Mitchell, and I think there are some parts there. Like I think RJ Barrett is a pretty good player, and it seems like the Knicks certainly are trying. If you're the Knicks, I think you have to do it. Like you said, draft picks are completely irrelevant to this franchise. They've been so bad for so long that most of their draft picks flame out. If you have the opportunity to get a guy like Donovan Mitchell, who I think is one of the most underrated players in the NBA, like you look at his numbers are every bit as good as Devin Booker's. They are literally almost exactly the same. And we put Devin Booker on a pedestal like he's one of the top 5 players in the league. Well, Donovan Mitchell is right there with him. He gets lost in the shuffle because of where he plays. If you're the Knicks and you can get that guy, you absolutely have to go out and do it, Spence. Like there's zero doubt in my mind. If you're the Knicks, you trade whatever they want. I mean, obviously within reason, but you give if it's 6 draft picks, give up the 6 draft picks. Who cares? It's the NBA. It's not like you're building a superstar team with all those first round picks that you develop or you get every season, because it obviously hasn't worked for them. So I know they were active during the draft, making a bunch of deals, and we'll see what happens. I mean, like I said, the NBA offseason never fails to disappoint. I'm sure there's going to be a couple blockbuster moves, and we're going to look completely different when teams show up to camp in October. We're like, oh my gosh, this is what the Knicks did, or oh my gosh, this is what the Lakers. I mean, the Lakers haven't done anything either. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, no, it's pretty crazy. And the thing is, like, the Knicks have a lot of extra first round picks. They traded back in this year's draft. They got a bunch of extras in the Porzingis trade. So they have the picks, and they should just get rid of them because, like we've talked about, I mean, you can think of Emmanuel Quickly is probably like the last guy, and maybe Mitchell, where they're at least worth having on your team. Other than that, they've literally had guys who are out of the NBA. like almost like within 5 years. So not a good sign for them.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the guys that they've drafted over the years. I mean, Kevin Knox, Frank, whatever the guy's name that they spelled wrong on his jersey, Clay Anthony Early. They did draft Greek Freak's brother, but Tim Hardaway, Kostas Papanilako, Iman Shumpert. I mean, I liked Iman Shumpert, but Jordan Hill, Wilson Chandler, Ronaldo Balkman. Remember, you're probably too young to remember that trade, but or that draft. But like they've stunk when it comes to the draft. I mean, they have so many of these guys. You're looking, you're like, what the hell is this franchise doing?
No,
we'll see. I think last year they had 4 draft picks, and it's like only one of them were still on the roster. So I think you have to make the move if you're the Knicks. Just do it. Just suck it up and do it. Yeah. Like you said, they've got all those extra picks.
Yeah, it's
they made the deal with Dieng where they send him to OKC. They got a bunch of picks. Just trade for Mitchell. Just do it.
Yeah. We'll quickly go over to
Fact This. If you don't like the facts, take your ass back to bed. Fact This.
Yes, it is a fact that the NBA play-in tournament is here to stay. This comes to a bit of shock to some long NBA fans. Like, it was implemented just for COVID to give some more teams a chance. But, after a couple seasons, I say, hey, we're keeping it around. Magnum, how do you feel about it? Do you feel like it punishes the 7 and the 8 seed too much? I personally like it because I think it makes the regular season 10 times more interesting because most of the time it's extremely uninteresting, especially when you get towards the end. So I think I'm fairly happy about this decision.
Yeah, I like it as well. I think it gives some lesser teams an opportunity. I think none of those teams are going to win the NBA title, but it still gives fans in other markets an opportunity to kind of stick with their team through the end of the season. Because a lot of times in the NBA, I mean, if you're the Sacramento Kings, your season's over already. But at least being like in that 10-11 range, you maybe have that chance to make the playoffs, at least the play-in round. So it adds a little more intrigue to the season. I think anytime you could do that in the NBA, because for the most part, the offseason or the regular season is boring. So adding a little more intrigue to the regular season is always a good thing because, like I said, it's like if you're Sacramento or if you're Charlotte, you're never good enough. I mean, the Kings were once, but you're not good enough, at least in the recent future, to have that like 2nd or 3rd seed locked up by March. But if you're in the mix, at least it adds a little intrigue and it gives you something to keep playing for. And the other thing is it kind of takes away the idea of tanking for some franchises as well. And I can't stand when teams tank.
Yeah, I still think personally that there should be a tournament at the end of the season for all the teams that didn't make the playoffs to play for the first overall pick.
Yeah, the team that wins it gets the number 1 pick. I'm fine with. I like that as well.
That would literally make any team who didn't make the playoffs as competitive as humanly possible, and it punishes you for being bad. But that's a story for another time. We do have a couple minutes, and I do want to go over some of my favorite prop bets that I've seen here. Plus 600 for the Raiders to win the AFC West. That's, I don't know. I mean, they're definitely not going to make it, but I want to go over their alternative wins, and I think this is probably the biggest point of contention here that we could talk about. It's over under 7.5. So if you go over 7.5, you get minus 230. Under 7.5 plus 195. Personally, I think it's more likely that the season goes completely wrong for the Raiders than it goes right. So I feel like if you can get the plus 195 for the under, I think there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What to expect, but I do think Derek Carr is going to have a really good year because he finally has that number 1 receiver. So hopefully that translates to W's.
Yeah, we'll find out. Well, thank you so much for co-hosting with me, Mags. We will be back next Sunday, same time, 8 to 9. This is Out of Line. Brian Feldman will be back next week. See ya.